How to make a new stream.
That's what service is.
Okay, so I want to talk about the in this week's parsha is the parsha Saman. So I want to talk about the shaila of the bracha on the man. Now, most of the time when this shaila is mentioned, the bracha on the man, a lot of people discuss what was the bracha Rishona that they made on the man. What was the bracha Rishona they made on the man? Now, that's one shaila. I'm not going to talk about that, although I will mention, because Rabbi Frelsky just showed me in the Sefer, I opened it for a few minutes, and he says a Geshmak Cheshbon there, for the olim that learned Ketim Mavarchim last Zman, or last year. So, over there, he asks a kasha in the Gan Rava, he asks a kasha that maybe they shouldn't make a bracha b'chlal on the man, on the bracha Rishayim on the man, because let's say a person he had in mind that he's going to have a cookie, he's going to make a mezainis, and then halfway in the middle, he's like, I'm not in the mood of a cookie, and he switches in mind in the middle, so it could turn out that he made a bracha l'vatol. That's his kasha. So it turns out he made a bracha l'vatola, so Mamela, because, yeah, that's what he's saying. So Mamela, he says, maybe that should be the case, but he says, so, but then he says Gavalta Kazach for those that in the Cheshbon he brings the Pnei Yeshua in the beginning of Ketzim Mavarchim that says if you learn the bracha Rishonos from a Kal V'chomer, the Gemara says a Kal V'chomer, if you have to make a bracha after you eat, for sure you have to make a bracha before you eat. So it would come out Kal V'chomer is deraisa. So it would come out that the bracha Rishona is deraisa. But only on whatever there's a chi of bracha achrayna min haTorah, that's where there's a chi of bracha rishona min haTorah, right? If there's a mitzvah to bench, so there's a mitzvah to make a bracha rishona. So there's only a mitzvah midiraisa to make a bracha on bread. So it would come out, the Pnei Yeshua says, that there will be a bracha midiraisa, bracha rishona on lechem, which the Bach says in Kuf Samaches, the Rambam holds like that. The bracha rishona moitzi is deraisa. So it would come out that if you hold that man was lechem, like lechem min hashemayim, so it would come out that the bracha Rishon on it was deraisa, you would have to make it, and even a chashash bracha levatala, bracha levatala could be only derabanan, bracha shenetzricha, bracha levatala even. So he says they would have to have made a moiti. But either way, that's I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the bracha Rishon on the man, but I want to talk about the bracha achroin on the man. Now, you would say that so geshmaka sugya, geshmaka shaila. But l'maisa, lahalacha l'maisa, this is why are we talking about this? I mean, shar sinai bekama. I'm saying like, well, why are we talking about if you make a bracha achroin on man or not? None of us are going to be zoichet to eating man, right now. So, and mistam won't zoichet to eat man again. There'll be better people to pass in the shaila than me. So, l'maisa, what's the inyan to talk about this? So the inyan is a gavaldik tshuva in the tshuvas of Rabbi Avram ben Arambam. And Rabbi Avram ben Arambam, this paper was put together on the Rabbi Avram ben Arambam on Hilchos Brachos. And the Rabbi Avram ben Arambam had a shaila like this, that in Teiman, in those days, in Yemen, so there was no bread. There was not only no bread, there was no chamishis minei dagan. There was no dagan, there was no 5 grains. So what did they eat all day? They ate doichan. What's doichan? Millet or something like that. Like in China, they eat rice. Whatever. They ate non-chamishis minei dagan. So the shaila was that they come out, they'll never bench. So whoever grew up in Taiman will never bench. So it comes out that they may forget how to bench. They'll never have heard of the mitzvah of benching. So the shoyel asked Rabbi ben Arambam that l'chayra, since this is their this is what they eat. This is the only food they have, and this is what brings them their nourishment. So memela adarabba, they should bench. This is their only nourishment. Who cares? It's not chamishis meinei dagan. If you're in a society that the only thing that nourishes you is this food, and this is non-chamishis meinei dagan, so you also bench. And he has a raya. What's his raya? The raya is that the Gemara says in Brachis that where did we get the nusach of benching from? The nusach of benching, the Gemara in Mem Chesam at Beis in Brachis says that our Moshe tiken lahem Birkas Hazan. Moshe was misakin Birkas Hazan. The first bracha is Birkas Hazan. The second bracha, Yeshua was misakin when they came into Eretz Yisrael, and the third bracha was Shlomo Melech. Shlomo and David was misakin on Yerushalayim. So, the shoyel in the Rabbi ben Arambam, he says, what do you mean Moshe was misakin from Klal Yisrael Birkas Hazan? When? What they eat? They ate man, obviously. And that's what Gemara says. It says, Moshe tiken lahem Birkas Hazan b'shashi yard lahem aman. So that means that he was misakin Birkas Hazan for the man. So it means Klal Yisrael they benched on man, obviously. Because that was the nusach of bracha that Moshe Rabbeinu was misakin, was for the man. Man is not chamishis minei dagan. Man is not chamishis minei dagan. So why'd they make a bracha? Why'd they bench on it? Must be because that was what they ate. And if this is what satiates you, then memela you bench, and it's regardless of that it's shivas of chamishis minei dagan. So Mela Rav ben Arambam had this shaila, and it was negel halach l'maisa. So now we could talk about it. It's negel halach l'maisa. So whether they benched on the man, this is what Rav ben Arambam wants to tell you. The shoyel. So Rav ben Arambam says, no, you have no raya from the man to this case. Why? Number one, he says that was all of Klal Yisrael was in one place. Maybe if all of Klal Yisrael is nourished from a certain type of food, which is not chamishis meinei dagan, then you're right. But he says v'chiteiman ruba de alma. Okay, so you guys don't have food. I mean, the rest of us still do. So memela, if you what?
No, their whole life.
Their whole life, but he says you can't make a precedent from the man, even if you're right that non-bread items can turn into Birkas Hamazon. If that's what you eat, it has to be all Klal Yisrael. That would be your whole raya. So you have no raya to one place.
What's the mile of whole Klal Yisrael versus?
Because this is the lachem of Klal Yisrael. But he says the second shot he says is that you got wrong shot on the whole sugya. And this is part of a whole bigger sugya, basically, but that's not what the Gemara means. The Gemara, Avada didn't bench. And it said, we don't bench because Moshe Rabbeinu told us to bench. We bench because it's a pasuk. Now, we don't know how to, just like in tefillah, there's a mitzvah to say tefillah. But what nusach do we use? The Torah says to make tefillah. What nusach do we use for tefillah? Anshe Knesset thousands of years later, or whatever, made a nusach. So he says, there's a mitzvah midaraisa, chalta v'savata v'rachta on lechem. What nusach to use? We use the nusach. The Moshe was misakin on the man, but not that Moshe was benching. Moshe Rabbeinu's people were not being mekayim the mitzvah of achalta v'svalta v'rachta. They were just saying a bracha, and he was misakin this bracha. We use that bracha to parallel our benching. I think that's what he's saying there. So they were not benching. They were not benching. So you have the whole pshat in the Gemara wrong, and memela they weren't benching. And he says, and anyway, he says it can't be that we really follow exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu did, because he says, think about it. What does our nusach say? Our nusach says, that's in the next bracha. But he says, some say, so he says, that pasuk was written by David HaMelech, way after Moshe Rabbeinu. So a lot of the things in our nusach couldn't have been written by Moshe Rabbeinu. It's impossible. So anyway, so obviously, Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't really benching. He was just doing this, he was masaking them to make that bracha, and we use that nusach. Okay. Now, So Mela, he held there's no raya. Now, interestingly, by the way, there's the end of that shtickle. We mentioned it in the shir on Shabbos morning. That the end of that shtickle says, by the way, they also didn't have wine. So they had no bread. They had no wine either. So now there's a different problem. If you have no bread and you have no wine, you can't make kiddush. So these people grew up never hearing Birkas Hamazon and never hearing kiddush. So he says that. So what is this eitzah? Just agav. So what's So what's the Rav Ben Rambam's eitzah to the people in Taman? So he says you should teach them to bench, but without Hashem's name, because we want people to know how to bench. They should say Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Hazan Esanim, and they should say a whole nusach without Hashem's name. That's what he says there. And then he says in Kiddush they should do the same thing. They should take a loaf of this, millet cracker, and they should take a loaf of it, or 2 loaves of it, whatever, and they should say Sha'akol Niyah B'Dvarai, and then say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Asher Kedeshanu B'Mitzvosav V'Ratzavanu V'Shabbos Kodshem. Say the whole nusach of Kiddush, and this way it's Shlo Tishtakach Teras Kiddush. As I sagt Rabbi Ben Rambam in Eitzah to do it. Frekta Emek Bracha. What type of Eitzah is that? L'maisa, it's a hefsek between the shahakol of the millet bread to the eating. So that's Emek Bracha's kasha on this shtickle. That how could he?
Rambam says specifically to say shahakol.
Yes, exactly what he says. So, right. So it's a very, very good question. Now, we suggested a possible answer, whatever, but that's not for now. But upon him, so he said. So this is the shaila. Now, the assumption over here of this shail in Rabbi Ben Rambam was obviously that man was not bread, and therefore, since man was not bread, so Memela he had his whole raya and that they could bench on non-bread items, and Rabbi Ben Rambam didn't argue on that. He just said that it's not a proof because they didn't really bench or whatever. But the emes is that others learn punk fakir. The Torah says lechem in hashemayim. The Torah in numerous places through the parsha calls it lechem. So punk fakir. Maybe they taka benched, and that's gufa pshat in the Gemara that Moshe Rabbeinu was misakin Birkas Hamazon, and the shoyel in the Rabbi Ben Rambam is correct that the taka did bench on it, and Moshe Rabbeinu was misakin Birkas Hamazon, and the taka benched. It's not chamishis meni dagan. Fakir, it was chamishis meni dagan. The tchuna, the metzias of this lechem in Hashemaim had a din as if the metzias was lechem. It was made out of all the qualities of chamishis minei dagan, and therefore the metzias of it took on as if it was chamishis minei dagan. And this is what Chaim Kanievsky says. Chaim Kanievsky in the time of the Kra, he says the opposite. He says Gemara Bracha says they benched. Obviously, it was lechem. Now. He has a shaila the opposite way around. He says, what happens if a guy, if it's so much so he holds like this that he has a fakir kasha. He asks, what happens if the person had in mind that it was peiros? Is the pshat that it's bread that tasted like peiros and they would still have to bench? Or do you say taka turned into peiros? But he holds that it was the Torah calls it lechem. It was lechem. So memela was taka lechem, and the only shaila he has is what happens if you had in mind. It means if you had in mind lechem for sure. It's lechem. If you had in mind peiros, that's his shaila. And then he says maybe you would. So he says he's mistapik. Then he brings a raya from Rashi in Baal Loischa that it says that that if it did not turn into kishum and avatichim because those things are not good for your stomach and not good for meinekes. So obviously, if it was just bread that tasted like kishuim, then what was the problem? Obviously, it turned into kishuim, and that's why it gave stomach ache. And Memela had a raya that if then you wouldn't bench. But Kolzman, it was taka lechem, and you treated it as lechem. But taka had a din of chamishas minei dagan. So Memela, he held that's why you would that was pshat, and that's why you would bench. The in Rabbi Yosef Engel also in the Gilyonei Hashas, he also says the same thing, that it was lechem mamish as long as you had kavana for it to be lechem. And he brings other rayas that it turned into that thing itself. There's a raya there from that it says he says there Chiddush that the be'er was the same thing as the man. The mayim turned into whatever liquid you had in mind to drink. So Memela, he says that because the Medrash says that Nadav and Avihu, they went in as shtuya yain, and that's why they got killed, because they went in having drunk wine, and they did avodah, and therefore they were chayv misa. So what wine? Who said they had wine over there in the midbar? So Teretz is that they took the water from the be'er, and they turned it into yain. So you see a chayiv misa from drinking water that tastes like yain. Obviously, it was mayim. It was yain. It turned into yain mamish, not just it tasted like yain. So therefore, he brings a raya that the lechem was the same thing. I don't know if it's...
took grapes from the...
There's a couple of grapes sitting there, you're saying. Now, which one happened first? The story of the... No, the vinegar? Okay. So there's a Chazon Ish has a different ha'ara. It's an unbelievable ha'ara. Chazon Ish, he mamish uses it in the lumdus of the sugya. Chazon Ish has a different point why it would be questionable you should bench. Because it says that the unbelievable Chazon Ish, he says that that in Simon Chavches and Archaim, he says that the man was nivla ba'ivarim. That's what it says. So he says, l'ch'oira, the man, right after you ate it, it was already after the shir ikol. It was already just like if you eat bread and you wait 72 minutes, so it's already nisakal, it's already like part of your bloodstream, it's already part of your system. So memela, you don't bench at that point because you don't feel satiated from it. It's already nisakal in your basar. So memela, you don't bench. So he says that was the whole godless of the man. That right away it was nisakal into the basar. It was nisakal baivarim. It was nisakal. So therefore he doesn't understand how could you make a bracha chrein on it. The second you ate it, it was nivla by Ivarim, and Memela, there's no room anymore. It's like right after 72 minutes. Chaim Kanevsky says, Muchach, maybe it took 72 minutes to be nivla by Ivarim. Okay, whatever. But anyway, that's the Chazon Ish's ha'ara on this inyan. There's one other inyan on this. It's a pretty sadistic inyan, also in the sugya of Birkas Hamazon, also in the Negel Maisa, is that l'ch'ora, there's another kasha on this, which is that why would they anyway bench, even if you say it was lechem, but lemaisa it was kitzapichas b'dvash, which the Mefarshim say meant that it was fried in honey. So it says over there. So l'chayr it's not lechem anyway. So memela, even though the Torah calls it that, but l'chayra it's like pasava b'kisnin. So if it's fried in honey, maybe it's even worse than that. But zikr was made with dvash. So anyway, who says the bracha is mizaynis? Is hamoitzi and Birkas Hamazon. So some say, well, l'chayra they were kaveh suda on it. And the whole thing is that it was given to be your meal. So memela they would have to bench, but the emek bracha is the yisod over here, and really in the sugya it's more like that. That really, be'emes is, and this answers the other, maybe perhaps another kasha, that really midiraisa, all the things that we call pasabal b'kisnin, like snack bread or whatever, cookies, etc., really midiraisa are called lechem. That's why they're chayv and challah, and they all have all the other halachas of lechem. So really, every lechem, pasabal b'kisnin, is really, it has a shem lechem to it. It's called bread for whatever halachas of it's called bread. And memela you're mechuyev to bench. However, Chazal Midrabanan made a distinction that if it's taka meal bread and you use it for a suda, then you say 3 brachas on it. If it's non-meal bread, it's only snack bread, it's not a suda bread, memela you make a mezainis and you make only me'ein shlosh. Now that's true because if that's true, and it's a raya, that midaraisa you're yoytze Birkas Hamazon with 1 bracha. You don't have to say all 3 midaraisa. Really, midaraisa you're yoytze with 1 bracha. And memela, if you're yoytze midaraisa with 1 bracha, so Chazal said midaraisa, you could be yoytze on pasav b'kisnin in the chiyuv of v'achalta v'sata v'rachta on 1 bracha. So memela, if you go like that, it will come out very good. That we started off, that really was called lechem. Like the shoyel, it was really called lechem. And really they benched. And what was the raya they benched? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was masak in Birkas Hamazon. So they taka benched. And it was taka, but oibazai l'chayra we hold Birkas Hamazon is midraisa. You have to say 3 brachas. So the answer is that Rabbeinu Bachai speaks out is that that the other 2 inyanim of Yerushalayim and all the aretz, since they didn't have the aretz yet and they didn't have Yerushalayim, maybe they mentioned it in the first bracha, but there was no bracha by itself. There was never masakin to make it its own independent bracha. So really, Moshe Rabbeinu, they taka benched. And even if it was possible, because it wouldn't matter, because it's also pas midiraisa, it's also called lechem. However, normally we say 3 brachas on it, but you're yoytze midiraisa with 1 bracha. So Moshe Rabbeinu was masakin the ikar Birkas Hamazon and with 1 bracha on the bread, even though it was it was tzapichas bedvash, it's still called lechem, and they did have a chiyuv, and memela, even if they had a chiyuv, and even if it was bedvash, it was still have a chiyuv, and they still benched, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu was Masakin because it wasn't for it.
Not hungry.
That's why we have Shabbos. Shabbos after the Zayt. So why is that after Shabbos the Zayt? Zayt Shvan Erev Shabbos.